I finished wire brushing and cleaning the frame. After that, I spent some time blueprinting it. What I mean by that is taking some basic measuring tools, a digital caliper, and an old micrometer. I was using them to measure the thickness of the steel all the way back, and I made several notes on the thickness, and also I circled some areas of concern, which I have basically two on this right-hand side. Here where the shock mount was, and also in the back just ahead of the shackle. So over here, though, you're going to see two thin areas that rusted through. Those opened up as I cleaned. This was the box, little panel they had in here that was reinforcing the shock mount. So it was full of dirt and rocks and everything else. So you know that over time, all that stuff sitting down here had rusted out. Everywhere around it, however, I have 115, 110 thou up in here, about 100. So it's not like this whole section's rotted out. It's really just right in this one spot. And there's even some holes here, which those are just bolt holes for whatever. I'm going to basically drill these out, make a nice clean hole. I'm going to plug and weld these flush. Like you'll see on some hot rods and other trucks, people will try to make the frame look really nice and keep stuff out. You get that nice smooth look, and they'll powder coat them. It's like they never were even there. I'm going to fill all these holes that are in here that way and grind them flat. Same with the top. There's some holes that I'm not going to use anymore. I'm going to fill all those. And there's one little actual rust through spot. That's not a factory hole. That's where the weld that I ground off through on the shock here. So we'll get this patched in there before I can, box all the way down. Go ahead and pan towards the back. Show you that one other area. And that's going to be right here. This is where that rear cross member that was also the spare tire carrier was bolted in. On the bottom, where the metal was touching each other, it had kind of flaked and popped up. So it's got this weird thinness right there. I would like to cut this back to the shackle because it's thick in here. Looks all right. And I would like to make a repair patch here before I box it in. And then any of these other factory holes, again, I would like to just plug weld, fill, and grind those down so that they can be eliminated. And then I can I'll be able to go back and box this whole section in one big piece. Also wanted to show how this is basically an open C channel. There was some real thin, boxed in sections that were adding a little bit of rigidity. But now that it's open, you can see I can squeeze this. I'm not a very strong guy. I'm just giving it a light grip here. And you can see the deflection just like that. So that's why they say, a box frame is stronger. And when I get this finished, it's going to be supported on all sides. So I think that's what the plan is for this right-hand side. Now we'll go look at the left-hand side. We're looking at the left-hand side of the frame. I did the same process with blueprinting. I've got my measurements down the frame. I have the same kind of area of concern here. There was a partial shock mount. It was never fully installed. It was just a welded panel, but it was also full of stuff, and it did rust through a little bit less, just through the bottom there. So this whole section, though, is a lot better than the other side. I have a couple more holes here as well. I'm going to plug weld, fill those. I will do the same here. And up top, there's a couple here and there. The only thing I'm not going to fill is this oblong shaped hole. Those fit the wiring harness clips down the frame. I'm going to leave those because that's nice to be able to attach the wiring. We'll go further back. I'll show you the real issue that I have over here. Now we're looking at the worst part of the back of the truck. So this hole, obviously, we have an issue, and here. That's where, this area is where there was a shock mount welded in, and I had to cut that hole out to knock it out. Well, it was full of all kinds of junk, and I think that, being just behind the tire, stuff kicking up, I'm blaming it on the accelerated, crust in here for that. But I'm going to need to fix that before I box this in. So being that this hole, we got 110, 100, 112, and then a hole, and then these are the bolt holes where, this is that same situation actually here. This is where that spare tire brace, that cross member, that carrier that was bolted on, Same kind of thing. It's just thinner right here where it was attached. Because this whole section's kind of funky, I think I'm gonna end up cutting this out and putting a new piece in here before I box it. Same in the back. I'm gonna have to cut some of this out and put a panel in here and try to make this to make that right before I box this in. So that's the plan. Any of the holes again that I'm not gonna need, I'm gonna go ahead and just weld those up. Even the ones that spare tire carrier, I'm not gonna be able to bolt it on the same way anymore. So I'm just gonna fill those and try and keep this inside frame cleaner. So we'll get doing that next. Step by step, we'll start with the easier stuff and we'll work our way back. I'm gonna start with the small, easier stuff on the back of this frame. And that's gonna be filling any unused holes around here. These happen to be for the fuel tank cross member. I have to mount that differently now because of how I'm boxing the frame. So these holes can get filled. There's a couple more here. Now these are the oblong holes I was talking about. That has different plastic clips like the wiring harness that attach. I'm gonna leave those because something is gonna go in there. A little trick that you can do on smaller holes like this is use a copper backer. This is some 1/8 plate copper I had laying around. I whittled this out. I'm gonna stick this behind here, and the nice thing about copper is that steel weld won't stick to it. So if I clamp this tightly behind here, I can build this up and fill that in and come back and just kind of grind it flat. And I can do that anywhere I can get this in place. The smaller holes, I'm going to do that. The bigger stuff, I will be making some plugs because they're just going to be too big to try to fill that with weld. I guess one other thing about the copper and something this thick is copper is very good at pulling the heat away. So you're going to be able to have less distortion, warpage with something like this. I mean, this is a thicker metal, but if you're doing like thinner sheet metal and stuff, that's another benefit. It holds it in place and sucks some of the heat out. So first thing I got to do is to clean these. I'm going to take my die grinder and I want to make sure that the surface is clean inside of these holes because there could be a little bit of rust and corrosion in there. I want to get that out. And a clean weld's a happy weld. So let's clean these holes, clamp this in, and we'll give it a try. Did it. I think it needs a little more heat. Okay, adjusted the settings to see if it works a little better this time. Seems to have. Here it goes. Came right off. Look at that. So those holes are welded. I'm gonna go ahead and do some more. And then after that stuff's cooled down, I can grind them flat. I'd gone around this frame back here, and any of the smaller holes that I was able to use this copper backer on, I filled them up with weld, and then I ground them down. They turned out really nice. So now I have these 4 holes. There's 2 on this side and 2 on the other that are just too big to use that technique. So I have this just piece of cardboard that I started making tracing a template out. So what I'm going to do is get this size traced out, and I'll cut this template now 4 pieces of steel that I can neatly fit in here so that I can weld these on, and then I can get that part done next. That's going to leave me with, I believe, just 2 more holes that are further down in here that I can't quite get to. So I'm going to have another little trick on those that I can make a plug, and then I can weld those in. I've got all those other holes filled and ground down smooth, so now I'm on to the last two. They're on the bottom of the frame where it kind of curves up under the bed. They're in a hard to reach area because I've already boxed it in too. So the holes are actually for the fuel tank cross member that I can't use anymore because of how bad it was, and also since I'm boxing it in, I'm gonna have to redesign that later. So I've got this scrap piece of steel here. I measured those holes with my caliper. They're about 525 thousandths. So I have this just bolt sizing guide. It's got nice little circles in it. The 9/16 hole is actually really close to what I want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trace these onto here, and then I'm gonna cut them off basically in like little squares with my cutoff wheel. And then I'll be able to just tack this nail to those, and then I can go over to my grinding wheel and I'll spin them up with my drill, and I'll trim them down until I get them to the size where they're going to fit in there. And then what's nice is I'll be able to hold this nail in place while I tack it, and then I can fill those holes with the little plugs that I made. We'll do that next. I'm done with the small repairs and filling the unused holes. I need to move on to this area. This is where there was a shock mount, and it had a boxed in area that was full of dirt and stuff, and it had rusted through. When I had needle scaled it, it kind of opened up. This was just where I had cut it out so I could clean it and see what was going on in there. Now I got to come back and fill this. So I'm going to make a template and cut this larger than it is now. Try to make some nice radius corners instead of these sharp cuts so that I can weld the piece back in here, and that'll get it also beyond where the box was, so it's back into the thicker sides here. I'm going to do that next and get that welded in. we've come a long way. I saved the worst part of the back of this truck for last. That's right here. This is where that shock mount was. It was boxed in, and because of that, it got thin and pitted right here. I need to be extra careful cutting this out because if I take too much at once, it could weaken to the point where this frame could fold and just buckle. I don't want that to happen. So far, I've been doing these repairs section by section. Everything's been done on flat level ground, unloaded. I don't have a chassis plate or any jigs to hold this frame exactly where it needs to be. So I've been leaving as many structural components in place as I can and adding braces where needed. I do need to remove the rear bumper and the trailer hitch next because it's going to be in the way of what I'm trying to do here. Before I cut this off, because there's no way in hell those bolts are coming out, I can tell you they look pretty bad. I'm going to be adding a couple of extra braces back here because this has been a major structural component in keeping this frame aligned. So I'll do that and then I can remove it. Once I get that done, I'm going to come in here and cut a nice clean window where this is thin and pitted, because on the other sides of it, it's clean thick steel. So I'll be able to put a plate in here that spans far beyond this area, and then I can attach that, span this gap before I box it in. Not as heavy as I thought. Maybe 80 pounds or something. Oh. Done. Got room for activities.